Humans are remarkably sensitive to light. If you want to know what makes the difference between a basic environment and a photorealistic environment, you need to focus on the lighting. The human eye, in combination with the brain, uses lighting, shadows, reflections to make sense and understand the world around them, or even impose these ideas on it.
So back in Unity, let's open up our lighting tab. So we go up to Window, Rendering, Lighting, and we're going to dock that right next to our inspector. Let's make sure that real-time global illumination is turned off. We're going to use the shadow mask lighting mode, and our light mapper will be set to progressive GPU. If you don't have a GPU, you can use CPU. Let's create an adaptive probe volume by right-clicking, Light, Adaptive Probe Volume. So since this is probably the first time you've added a probe volume to your scene, we're going to need to open up the URP asset. Underneath the lighting section, let's change our light probe system from light probe groups into adaptive probe volumes. Now this gives us access to our adaptive probe volume. So you can see it's not really fit to our scene yet, so let's click Fit to Scene. This works in most cases here, but as you're going to find out, it didn't exactly work for me the first time around. Either way, let's click Bake Probe Volumes. This can take a little bit of time, so let's look at some of the other lighting settings here. If we go into Adaptive Probe Volumes, we want to make sure that we have Virtual Offset enabled. This prevents our probes from being placed inside of geometry. You can leave sky occlusion on or off, but I will let you know it definitely increases the time that it takes to bake. In fact, a lot of the time that's being spent to bake this adaptive probe volume was spent on sky occlusion. Okay, now that we're done, let's see what these probes look like. We can do this by going up to Window, Analysis, Rendering Debugger. Let's select Probe Volumes, and then let's select Display Probes. So for me at this point, I was expecting to see some probes in here, and I went through a few different solutions trying to find out why I didn't see any. I actually did do everything right here. But it wasn't until a little later that I realized all of the probes were for some reason being placed way off in the corner. So this is clearly a bug. But fortunately, what we can do is go in and modify our volume itself. If we choose Fit to Selection, then we have control over the edges of this volume. So I'm just going to use orthographic mode, and I'm going to drag these edges, set the height a little bit, and we'll try it again. Okay, there we go. That's way better. So each one of these orbs represents a little bit of saved lighting data at that position. And we can use these light probes to cast other types of shadow or lighting effects on dynamic objects as they move through the environment. Otherwise, you put a lot of work on the direct lighting system, the real-time lighting system, to make those calculations. And so this is just a little shortcut, computational shortcut. Let's go up to our lighting and environment settings. We always want to play with our fog a little bit to see what looks good. I always prefer a slight tint of orange or pink. It tends to give a nice atmosphere of like a warm, sunny day. If you want to have dense humidity, usually that's the type of thing that we can convey with fog is humidity. So you can use exponential squared or exponential. I prefer exponential squared. As you can see, exponential just brought it up a little closer to the camera. Now back in our directional light. Let's also change the color of that. We'll make sure that it's on mixed mode. Again, I kind of prefer a type of yellowish tint to the light. I always feel like if you have these white fluorescent lights, it tends to make the scene look a little dead. You know, it's not supposed to be an office space. Maybe you want to mimic the lighting of certain times of day, so you might switch to a pink color for sunset or sunrise. Don't forget, you'll probably want to change your skybox along with that. If you like a lens flare type of effect, then what you can do is add that to your light and you automatically get this little lens flare. I'm going to turn off the display probe since it tends to slow down the rendering a little bit. We don't need to see them anymore now that we know they worked. Alright, let's create some reflection probes. Again, reflection probes allow us to store reflections based on a certain area and to get mapped onto other smooth, shiny surfaces. So, much to your dismay, perhaps most reflective surfaces in games or environments aren't really reflecting light from that position. Instead, we have this probe that we create and we bake. And so if I go in to modify this material a little bit, turn up the shininess, we can see now exactly how smooth that looks. Along with some post-processing effects, it looks great. So I do have other reflection probes in the environment. You usually want to have a few of them. For a very astute user, they may notice that the reflections that are being cast on some materials don't actually match the things that are around that object. So for that reason, you might want multiple. Here's one that's on the other side of the track, and I'm gonna just touch up this glass a little bit. I've increased the resolution, rebaked it, and looks great. So I think that by default, the resolution of the capture is quite low. You probably want to bump that up just a little bit. Back in our lighting scene, we're just going to double check some of our settings. We need to make sure that real-time global illumination is turned off. The reason is because it's not actually compatible with our adaptive probe volume. All of our samples will generally increase the fidelity of our lighting. And so I'm going to hit bake, and this is typically the longest type of bake. This can take a little while depending on what settings you're using, what type of GPU you have. As you increase the number of samples, the number of direct samples and indirect samples, and environmental samples, this can drastically get longer. So just experiment with these settings, see what looks good. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out.